तस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरोन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलम् श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तां सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनासहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपदान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकाकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते। तप्तकाञ्चन गौरांगी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So welcome all the devotees for the Bhakti Vaibhav class. In case during the course of the class, if the voice quality is becoming poor, you can let me know. Sometimes in the course of the class, I may not be able to see the message in the chat box, but you can somebody can immediately tell through the voice, then I can immediately understand and see either switch off the video or some other option. So yesterday we began the discussion on third canto, chapter 7. So I'll just go through the beginning verses of Mahatma Vidur's questions, and then we'll start from the 9th verse. So Vidur asked from the second verse, he said, the second verse he asked a question about the Supreme Lord. How can the Lord, who is completely spiritual and who is without change and beyond the gunas, or who is the possessor of spiritual potencies, how is it that that Supreme Lord becomes connected with the actions which involve three modes? Chinmatrasya, Avikarinah, Nirgunasya and Bhagavatah. These are all important words. How can the Lord, who is Chinmatrasya, who is completely spiritual, Avikarinah, who is without change, Nirgunasya, who is beyond the gunas, Bhagavatah, who is the possessor of spiritual potencies, spiritual opulences, then how does he become connected with the gunas? So we discussed this verse. And then the second question Vidura asked was that, second question was about the impetus of the Supreme Lord for performing his pastimes. Kridayam Udyaborbasya Kamas Chikridasya Kamas Chikridisanyataha. Normally children, when they play, they have a certain impetus. But the Lord is actually Svatas Triptasya. He is actually self-satisfied. If he is self-satisfied person normally does not perform any actions. Usually for any action some impetus is there. But the Lord is self-satisfied, then why is he actually performing actions of creation, maintenance and annihilation? And if he is performing those actions, then how can he be self-satisfied? There must be some impetus. So the fourth verse is also reinforcing the same question. The Lord definitely creates the universe, maintains. And then in the fifth verse, the third question was about the position of the living entity. The living entity, his knowledge cannot be destroyed by time, place, nature or condition or any other cause associated with ignorance. Then how can the living entity's knowledge, how is it that the living entity, how does he lose his knowledge? How does he actually get associated with ignorance? How does he become associated with ignorance? So this is a question about the jiva. And then the fourth question is about the miseries of the living entity. The super soul is right in the presence of the living entity. The Paramatma is right next to the living entity. It is not that Paramatma has appointed some representative to be next to the living entity. The sixth verse, I am just doing recapitulating, sixth verse of 7th chapter. The Paramatma is right there, right next to the living entity, and still, why does the living entity suffer from ignorance? Why does he lose his sense of bliss? If he is right next to the person who is bliss personified. Amushya durbhagatum va klesho va karma bhikutah. In this way, he asked essentially four questions. First question is about Supreme Lord. Second question is about the impetus of the Supreme Lord to perform creation, maintenance and annihilation. Third question is about the jiva. How did the jiva become associated with ignorance? And fourth question is about how is it that the jiva is undergoing miseries right in the presence of the super soul? So Maitreya Vidura asked that please actually destroy this illusion in my mind. Then Maitreya Rishi, he seemed to be astonished and then, but he starts answering. So 9th verse. Seyam Maitreya Uvacha Seyam Bhagavato Maya Yannayena Virudyate Ishvarasya Vimuktasya Karpanyam Muta Bandhanam. Sri Maitreya said, certain conditioned souls put forward the theory that the Supreme Brahman or the personality of Godhead is overcome the illusion or Maya, and at the same time they maintain that he is unconditioned, and this is against all logic. So here in this verse, Maitreya Rishi answers two questions about the Supreme Lord, the first two lines. The second two lines, he answers the question about the jiva's association with ignorance. The first two lines, he talks about how the Lord's association with the three modes. The third and fourth line, he talks about jiva's association with ignorance. So Seyam Bhagavato Maya Yan Nayena Virudyate. Yan Nayena Virudyate. So the Maya potency, Bhagavataha, which is belonging to the Lord, which belongs to the Lord, Bhagavataha Maya, but Yan Nayena Virudyate, which cannot be understood by logic, which cannot be understood by logic, and belonging to the Supreme Lord. Vishwanath Chakravartipad says one more point. The Maya belongs to the Supreme Lord, but the Maya is not the Swarupa Shakti of the Lord. Maya is not the Swarupa Shakti of the Lord. And this Maya is the cause of the deprivation and ignorance for the Jiva who has the possibility of realizing the form, knowledge and bliss of the Supreme Lord. So essentially the Maya potency belongs to the Lord, with inconceivable powers. Belongs to the Lord with inconceivable powers, and Maya cannot be known by logic. Yan Nayena Virudyate. You cannot understand Maya simply by logic. And this Maya potency is the cause of the living entity coming into ignorance. And the living entity has the innate capacity to realize the form, knowledge and bliss in relation to the Supreme Lord. But that living entity comes under the ignorance because of the Maya potency. So here, very beautifully, if you see Prabhupada's translation, Prabhupada gives some very important purport point in this. That some people put forward the theory that the Supreme Lord is overcome by illusion. And at the same time, they maintain that he is unconditioned. And this is against all logic. So the whole theme of the Prabhupada's purport, one of the main things which Prabhupada raises is that the Supreme Lord can never be overpowered by Maya. In fact, this understanding, the Lord can never be overpowered by Maya, this is one of the foundation of the Bhagavatam. In the first canto, 7th chapter, the last year when we discussed that section, and Vyasadeva, when he went into trance, he had the vision of the Supreme Lord, and that in that vision, what did he see? Apashyat Purusham Purnam Mayam cha tad apashtrayam. That means Apashyat, he saw the complete Supreme Personality of Godhead, under whose control Maya was present. Mayam cha tad apashrayam. Maya was actually standing behind the Lord, under the control of the Lord. And this is a very important verse. In fact, Jiva Goswami in the Tattva Sandarbha, he elaborately discusses those 3 verses which describe the vision of Vyasadeva. So in this particular verse, because Maya is under the control of the Supreme Lord, but one of the Mayavad theory, Mayavad theory, what does it say is that they have this concept of Daridra Narayana Seva, or Manav Seva is Madhav Seva. So what does this concept say? It says that actually the poor man is Narayan. If you serve the poor person, that is equal to the service to Lord Narayan. So actually what means, like, the living entity is Narayan. But actually the living entity is under the influence of Maya. But when we say living entity is Narayan, that means that the Lord Narayan comes under the influence of Maya. But this is fundamentally against the the very vision of Vyasadeva, where he says that Mayam cha tad apashrayam. The Maya can never overpower the Lord. But the Daridra Narayan Seva, Manav Seva is Madhav Seva. Actually, one famous spiritual leader, he propagated that. But many people, they speak this actually just casually in them. I have seen sometimes big political leaders, big some actors and all. Sometimes they speak in their speech. They speak this actually. Manav Seva is Madhav Seva, but they don't understand. They may not even realize actually the gravity of the mistake in this actually. So this is actually fundamentally against the Vyasadeva this one. So it is not that we are against doing some social service or philanthropic service. Social service, say philanthropy or social service is there. But when you make that serving the poor man is equal to serving the Lord, then that becomes a Mayavati. Like for example, where was I discussing last week? Last week, say in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami describes one of the item of sadhana bhakti. One of the item of sadhana bhakti is not being miserly. Out of the 64 items, one is like devotee should not be miserly. He says that Bhaktivinoda Thakur speaks about this item. He says miserliness is very contaminating for the devotee. There is miserliness of behavior, of wealth, and of effort. Then Thakur Bhaktivinoda says that with the Vaishnava, the devotee should stand up when he approaches and care for him attentively. When a Vaishnava comes, give proper welcome, attentively care for him. And a Vaishnava should give general respect and gifts to the Brahmanas. So sometimes we may think, all these are ritualistic Brahmanas or Karmakanda Brahmanas. Sometimes we see Hare Krishna devotees may speak like Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, no, whether they are Karmakanda Brahmanas or whatever, but one should give general respect to the Brahmanas and give gifts to the Brahmanas. And a Vaishnava should properly clothe and shelter his dependents. Poor as a dependents, household servants, whatever, they should be given proper remuneration, give them proper food and give them proper clothing. And then when you buy something from the market, a Vaishnava should take items from others for a suitable price. Sometimes we bargain for a very low price. And we may say, I am doing it for Krishna, it is for I'm a devotee, like that. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, like what I am reading is actually from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's explanation of this, one of the 64 items of sadhana bhakti. We may think like buying, actually one should take items from others for a suitable price. What does it got to do with the bhakti, actually, one may think. But actually when we are too miserly, that miserliness will contaminate the devotee and it will affect his bhakti practices. So you should take items from others for a suitable price. And then Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that a Vaishnava should pay taxes to the king, taxes to the government. And then he should show gratitude to benefactors, give food to the poor, medicine to the sick people, and clothes to those suffering from cold weather. If a Vaishnava treats anyone in the world improperly, then the fault of miserliness will arise. And it is even enough if suppose the Vaishnava does not have anything, at least he should speak properly. By proper speech, by wealth, and by his own labor, he should behave generously with others. Lack of proper behavior is forbidden for the devotee. So in the sense, why I quoted this this verse, the current discussion is that, why I quoted this particular section, because one extreme is that we avoid, all philanthropy is something, don't give any this thing to the poor, something. But when a Vaishnava becomes too miserly, that will contaminate us even as bhakti practices. Therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that when you see somebody is in need of clothes or food or something, give them. So the devotee will give some prasadam, give them whatever the basic necessities. Don't be too miserly. But then another extreme of philanthropy, sometimes in the name of transcendence, one may fail to show some basic human behavior. And then another extreme is that you make that Manav Seva is equal to Madhav Seva. And this is why it is so wrong is that because you say that the living entity is actually Narayan. That means what does it show? That the Narayan has come under the influence of the illusory potency, and which is fundamentally against the Bhagavatam's foundation. Apashyat Purusham Purnam Mayam cha tad apashrayam. So this is explained in detail in the purport. And also, see, the illusory potency, Maya is the energy of the Lord, but the Maya cannot overpower the Lord. Just like cloud, darkness, they actually arise from the sun, but they cannot overpower the sun. They cannot overpower the sun. Similarly, Maya is the energy of the Lord, but Maya cannot overpower the Lord. And Vishnu Chakravarti gives various quotations for this also. Like water arises from the sun, and just as water arises from the sun and enters the sun, and just as animals and plants arise from the earth and enter the earth, similarly, the world which is made of the gunas arises from the Lord and then enters back into Him. Or just as clouds, darkness and light appear and disappear in the sky in succession, similarly the Rajoguna, Sattoguna and Tamoguna appear and disappear in the Supreme Lord. Although the consciousness of the Lord, who is the Supreme One without a second, is never affected by material distress, by the reactions of material work, or by the constant flow of nature's modes, but ordinary persons, they think that the Lord is covered by His own creations of different elements. Just like a foolish person may think that sun is covered by the clouds. But actually sun can never be covered by the cloud. The clouds are covering only our vision of the sun. The clouds cannot cover the sun. So only a foolish person thinks that Maya covers the Supreme Lord, but the truth is that Maya covers us because of that we fall into ignorance. And so therefore this is one of the major points discussed in the Prabhupada's purport, the Daridra Narayan concept of the Lord can never be overpowered by the Maya. And Vishnu Chakravarti, then the third and fourth line, regarding that, Vishnu Chakravarti says that this Maya potency, which cannot be understood by logic, this Maya potency is the cause of the deprivation and ignorance of the jiva. Ishvarasya vimuktasya karpanya muta bandhanam. So the Maya potency is the cause of the ignorance of the jiva. So regarding this, he says that the living entity is in a condition of karpanya, deprivation of, living entity is in a condition of karpanya, that means deprivation. Or in the living entity is in an unfortunate condition, durbhagatvam. That means living entity is in a state of bondage, bandhanam. So, But it is not that the living entity's knowledge is destroyed by Maya. No, the living entity forgets his knowledge, loses his knowledge because of Maya potency. Just like a person, he has got a jeweled locket right in the neck, but he is searching for that jewel everywhere around. He just forgot that it is there in the neck only. Or it's like suppose a person has say 1 crore rupees in his bureau, but he forgot where he kept the key of the bureau. So the money is there. It's not that it is destroyed, but he lost the key to the bureau. He misplaced the key. Sometimes like in IIT Central Library, there, I remember there used to be lakhs of books. And they used to actually write this. The book which is misplaced is as good as lost. When you have some 10 books in the shelf, if you keep the book in a different order, then that's not a problem. You can locate it. But suppose if there are 2 lakh books in the library, and they are all put in the particular alphabetical order, subject-wise, but if somebody misplaces the book, then it is actually as good as losing the book only. It is as good as actually losing the book. So, the same way that, but it is not that the book is actually destroyed, it is there still within the library only. But it is misplaced book is as good as losing the book. Similarly, when the jiva's actually knowledge is not destroyed, but the Maya potency actually makes the jiva forget his real position. So, or another example which is given is that living entity coming under the control of Maya, when the living entity comes under the control of Maya, and then when the living entity is moving, being controlled by this Maya potency, it is like a man moving with a bad wife. When a man is moving around with a bad wife, then he will be exploited by that wife who will actually keep telling, oh, buy this, buy that, and then he will be like completely destroyed, like he will be thoroughly, he'll be all the time in anxiety, and his whole bank balance will go. So living entity moving around with Maya, it is like a man. This is another example which Krishna Chakotipad gives. And then he says that so the Maya Shakti and the Jiva Shakti, they are not separate from the Lord. At the same time, they are also different from the Lord. They are not separate from the Lord, but at the same time, they are also different from the Lord. So therefore, some of these points are explained in the purport. Prabhupada says that, there is no qualitative difference between the sun and its rays. The sun's rays are sometimes overpowered by another energy of the sun, namely by clouds or by snowfall. So the sun is compared to the Supreme Lord. The sun's rays are compared to the living entities. And the cloud, darkness, they are compared to the Maya potency. The sun rays and the cloud darkness both actually similarly, the Jiva and the Maya both are actually energies of the Supreme Lord. So the Supreme Lord can never be overpowered by Maya. Just like sun can never be overpowered by the clouds and the darkness. But the clouds and darkness can overpower the sun rays. They can overpower the sun rays. That means the Maya potency can overpower the living entity, but it can never overpower the Supreme Lord. So when the sparks fly out of touch with the original fire, they come under the influence of the non-fiery atmosphere. Thus they maintain the potency to be again one with the fire as sparks, but not as the original fire. So the sparks can everlastingly remain within the original fire as its part and parcels. But the moment the sparks of the fire, they get separated from the original fire, then they can easily become overpowered by some wind. The wind can come and actually extinguish them like that. But when the sparks are actually connected with that original blazing fire, then wind cannot actually affect them. So therefore, the conclusion is Daivi Kesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Durakyaya Mameva Ye Prapadyante Maya Metam Tarantite. The illusory energy is very difficult to overcome, but one who surrenders to Krishna, he can actually easily overcome it. So going to the next verse. Yadartena vinamushya pumsa atma viparyayah pratiyata upadrashtu swashiras chedanadikah. So here Maitreya Rishi says, the living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. So, the living entity is actually loss of his original knowledge and living entity losing his original state of bliss. It happens without a cause. It happens without a cause. And another point is, the living entity losing that knowledge is also illusory. Yad arthena vinamushya, because of the Maya potency, the jiva's knowledge, loss of knowledge and bliss makes its appearance, and it happens without a cause or a purpose. You can't actually understand why did to try to understand actually, why did the jiva come into the state of ignorance? You can't actually understand the cause of it. You can understand the purpose of it. Actually. The jiva is losing his knowledge. It happens without any cause or purpose. That is why it is called anadi. And pratiyata upadrashtu swashiras chedanadikah. And the living entity losing his original knowledge is also illusory, just like a swashiras chedanadikah. Just like a person seeing that his own head getting cut off in a dream. Can a person, suppose sometimes in a dream a person sees that his head is cut off and hanged somewhere. Is it actually possible? Can a person see the head cut off and hanged somewhere? If the head is cut off, he can no longer see. And if he is seeing, that means that his head is not cut off. So, but just like seeing one's own head getting cut off is illusory, so similarly, the jiva's loss of knowledge and bliss is also illusory. And it happens without any cause. Like sometimes the teacher actually may threaten the child, if you don't stop your mischief, I will cut off your head and hang in the tall nail, and you will not be able to get that head back only. And then the student becomes frightened. Okay, I will stop my mischief. So, Here, Vishnu Chakatipat further gives some explanation. Says, the seer of a dream sees his head is cut off, although his head is intact. Although his head is intact, in the dream state he experiences that his head is gone. So though the jiva does not actually have a destruction of knowledge and bliss, in a state of ignorance he perceives this destruction. So in that sense, the whole material existence is like a dream state only. Sometimes, like once one devotee was asking Prabhupada about the question of jiva fall. Prabhupada was giving one answer. He said that when the living entity comes to his original liberated position and he goes back to the spiritual world, although the living entity, he might have been in the material world for trillions of years, for trillions of births, but that whole experience in material existence, it appears like a small dream only. Coming to the spiritual world is equivalent to the experience of awakening from that dream state. Sometimes when you sleep in the night, sometimes a person gets a dream, and in the dream so many things happen. Somebody is chasing and somebody is, you are running somewhere and you are working hard. Somebody chastises you and you really become terrified by the dream. You think like when the dream would end, like when the situations would end, you really get terrified. And suddenly when you wake up, although in the dream you are really going through suffering, but when you wake up, the whole experience in the dream appears like a second actually. In the same way, when the living entity goes back to the spiritual world, the whole existence in the material world appears like a dream for a few seconds. So, or another example is, suppose there is a brilliant gold and silver is there in a room, but there is a darkness in the room. So, in the darkness of the room, the brilliant luster of the gold and silver is not lost by the darkness. Rather, the luster of the gold and silver is only covered by the darkness. So, similarly, the living entity is actually living entity is only covered by the Maya potency. And of course, the idea of the bondage of Paramatma is definitely false. The living entity's bondage is illusory and it is causeless. And the idea of the bondage of Paramatma is definitely false, because Paramatma can never come under the influence of the illusory potency. So Prabhupada explains this analogy. If a person sees that his head is cut off, that means he is in a state of hallucination. So similarly, when the living entity is thinking and enjoy independently from God, or he is God himself, that means he is in a state of hallucination. So that is why the concept of madness, normally mad people is defined as somebody who behaves abnormally and then they are put in a mental asylum. But actually, from a spiritual point of view, when the living entity is trying to enjoy independently from God, or the last act of madness is wanting to become one with God, that conception is madness. So from this definition of madness, practically the whole world is filled with crazy people. Whole world is actually filled with mad people. That is why when Dhruva Maharaj, when the Lord appeared to Dhruva Maharaj, the first prayer he offered is, Yonta pravishya mama vacham imam prasuptam sanjeevayat akila shakti darasva damna anyamscha hasta charana shavana tvagadin pranan namo bhagavate purushaya tubhyam. This verse is also chanted usually Before beginning the Bhagavatam class, many speakers also chant this verse as a Mangalacharan verse. In this verse, Dhruva Maharaj says that till now, actually all my senses were sleeping. Today my senses were awakened. That means, like till now all my senses were sleeping. That means like till now I was in a state of ignorance, wanting to enjoy independently from you. I was in a state of madness, or I was in a state of actually ignorance. But today my senses have been awakened. I got my understanding, my real position. So these points are explained, the purport. Yeah. So we'll go to the next verse. Yata jale chandramasa kampadis tatpruto gunaha drishyate sannapi drashtur atmano natmano gunaha. So in this verse, Maitreya Rishi says that the qualities of the subtle body, they do not belong to the jiva, but they appear to be belonging to the jiva. Just like a moon is there in the sky, and the reflection of the moon is there in the water. But when you see the reflection of the moon appears to be quivering. But actually, the original moon is not quivering. But because there is a movement in the water, so the reflection of the moon appears to be quivering. Similarly, that because of the subtle body, the qualities of the subtle body appear to be belonging to the jiva. Appear to be belonging to the subtle body. We go through lamentation, illusion, elation, depression, etc. But these qualities appear to be belonging to the jiva, just like the quality of the water which is quivering, that appears to be belonging to the moon, whose reflection is seen in the water. The qualities, as the moon reflected on the water appears to the seer to tremble due to being associated with the quality of the water, so the self associated with matter appears to be qualified as matter. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that the knowledge and bliss of the jiva may be covered. But how does the jiva obtain qualities such as attachment, Ichcha, Dvesha, Shoka, Moha, Kama, Krodha? How does he develop these qualities? Answer is, the qualities such as lamentation, illusion, etc., they belong to the Antakarana. Just like the trembling belongs to the water. These qualities, they do not belong to the jiva, but they belong to the, but they appear to be belonging to the jiva. Just like the trembling appears to be belonging to the moon, but actually in truth, the trembling happens for the water. So this is the analogy which is given. And one more point is that when the rays of the moon or sun produce clear images in the water like trees, walls or stones which are clear, they are called reflections. And another point Vishwanath Chakravarti gives in the same analogy, one more point he gives is that as the moon is perceived, when a person is actually living in the moon planet, of course, there are scientists who say they have landed in the moon, etc. I don't know answer to that, where they land. But when somebody is staying in the moon planet, he will perceive the moon as a person with hands and legs, wearing ornaments and garlands and everything. But somebody who is in a different place, he perceives the moon just as a white ball which is emanating some cooling rays. He does not perceive the moon as a person wearing some garland and ornaments, etc. So similarly, the Supreme Absolute Truth, some people who are those who practice Bhakti Marga, they perceive the Supreme Absolute Truth as the personality of God, as the Bhagavan. And some others, they perceive the Absolute Truth as Paramatma, the localized aspect. And some others perceive the Absolute Truth as impersonal. Just like moon is also perceived by the person on the planet moon as a person, and who are not in the planet here, this one as planet moon as simply as a race. And then, Prabhupada, when he is explaining this purport, like I found in Prabhupada's purport, the same analogy he brings out, at least what I could observe is that he brings out some 6 points. From the same analogy, he brings out 6 conclusions. So the first point he says is that, the same thing we mentioned before, that just like the reflection of the moon appears to be quivering, although actually it is quivering. So similarly, the living entities appear to be tainted by the material qualities like lamentation, illusion and miseries, although in the pure soul, such qualities are completely absent. Just like the quivering is completely absent in the original moon. This is the first point. And the second point he says is that, regarding this analogy, second point, he takes the analogy slightly differently. He says, the original moon is the Supreme Lord, and the reflection of the moon in the water is like the living entity. Reflection of the moon in the water is like the living entity. So therefore, he says that just like the separated parts and parcels of the Lord entangled in the water of material existence, the river water is compared to material existence. So the reflection of the moon in the water, that is the living entities. Just like the living entities entangled in the water of material existence, they have the quivering quality. Whereas the Lord is like the actual moon in the sky, and the Lord does not have the quivering quality. That means the living entity, because of being affected by Maya, they have this quivering quality. They go through illusion, lamentation, etc. But the Lord, who is like the real moon in the sky, he doesn't get affected by the water of material existence. Therefore, you don't see any quivering there. This is the second point he says. And the third point, in relation to the same analogy, he says, so the living symptoms are compared to the light of the sun and the moon, which illuminate the material manifestations like trees and mountains. So when the light of the sun and moon, when they reflect on the matter becomes very bright and praiseworthy. When the light of the sun and moon, when they reflect on the water, the matter becomes very bright and praiseworthy, they become shining. So similarly, when the living spirit enters something, then that matter appears to be having life. When the living spirit leaves the body, the person becomes dead. Even maybe the most beautiful Miss Universe or Miss World, when the living spirit, that body people want to throw that body, cremate that body. But when the living spirit is there in that body, then that body appears to be very wonderful. And the third point he says. And then the fourth point in regard to the same analogy, he says, that the light of the moon spread throughout the sky appears to be impersonal, but the moon planet is personal. The same point which Vishwanath Chakravartipad mentions in his analogy. The light of the moon is impersonal, but in the moon planet you can see the personal Soma, personal Chandra there, the person who is in charge of the moon god. And the living entities on the moon planet are also personal. So similarly, that the light of the moon spread throughout the sky appears to be personal, but the moon planet as it is personal. And similarly, on the living entities on the moon planet are also personal. So in the rays of the moon, different material entities appear to be comparatively more or less important. And then the fifth point, which Prabhupada says, is that fifth point he says is, the light of the moon is same everywhere, but because of being differently appreciated, it appears different. So sometimes when the light of the moon falls on a, say, blue marble, it may appear that there is a blue light there. When if you had gone to actually say Somnath, in Somnath temple, in the evening they have a light show. And they have a light show with the different color lights actually. Actually, in one sense, the same original light is there, but because of some combination of some colors, the light appears to be red color light, blue color light. Similarly, the light of the moon is same everywhere, but because of the different objects, it appears to be different. So similarly, the light of the Lord is equally distributed everywhere, but because of being differently received, it appears to be different. And this is another point to say. And then and the sixth point in relation to the same analogy, Prabhupada says that a conditioned soul, if the river is actually stand still, even the reflection of the moon will also appear to be completely still. But if the river water is actually flowing, if it is quivering, then the reflection of the moon will also be quivering. So in this case, he says that a conditioned soul, he quivers because of the material potency, because of the Maya potency. But a self-realized soul, or a person who is more advanced, but he remains standstill, just like the moon, the reflection of the moon appears standstill where the water is still. A self-realized soul, like yaha sarvatrana vishnehas tattat prapya shubhashubham nabi nandati nadveham tasya prajna pratishtita. Krishna says about the symptoms of a sita prajna in the second chapter. A self-realized soul is not affected by the happiness or distress. So just like when the water is still, the moon, the reflection also appears still. When water is moving, the moon is moving. The reflection of the moon is actually quivering. So similarly, a more advanced living entity, the self-realized soul, he does not quiver. But a conditioned soul, he appears to be quivering. So these are different points related to the same analogy. Prabhupada brings out different truths, the purport. So let me just go through a few verses, then we'll take a break. Savai nivritti dharmena vasudevanu kampaya bhagavad bhakti yogena tirodatte shanairiha. So now having told, see these verses are, we just discussed the three verses, 9, 10 and 11. In these three verses, Maitreya Rishi talked about the position of the Supreme Lord and the living entity, how the living entity comes under the ignorance, etc. So now in the 12th verse, he says how can the living entity be delivered from from this state of ignorance? So the solution he gives is the ignorance is destroyed either by following the Jnana Marga or by practicing Bhakti Marga. But that misconception of self-identity can be diminished gradually by the mercy of the personality of Godhead Vasudev through the process of devotional service to the Lord in the mode of detachment. So, Savai Nivritti Dharmena, the ignorance gradually disappears. Shanai means gradually, by Bhakti Mishra Jnana, arising from destruction of impression subtle body, and by Bhakti arising from mercy of the Lord, coming through devotees. So, Vishnu Chakotipat says that this ignorance can be destroyed by the path of Bhakti Marga and also by the path of Jnana Marga. I mean, of course, Jnana Marga has to have some element of Bhakti. Let's say by the practicing Bhakti Mishra Jnana or Jnana Mishra Bhakti, and by practicing Bhakti. So by this, the ignorance of the living entity is destroyed. And this happens gradually. According to the various, there are various degrees of Anartha Nivritti. It happens gradually. So Vasudeve Bhagavati, this verse is, we can all say, this verse is equivalent to the first canto verse, Vasudeve Bhagavati, Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha, Janayatyashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayad Ahetukam. The development of knowledge for the purpose of knowing everything without rendering devotional service is considered a fruitless labor, and one cannot get the desired result by such labor of love. So, Jnana Marga without Bhakti is considered a fruitless labor. It is like beating an empty husk of grain. Next verse. Yadendriyo paramota drashtratmani pare harau viliyante tadaklesha samsuptasyeha kritsnashah. So, when the senses are satisfied in the seer, the super soul, the personality of Godhead, and merge in him, all the miseries are completely vanquished as after a sound sleep. So this verse says that the previous verse mentioned that the ignorance will be destroyed gradually. Tirodatte Shanairiha. So in the next verse, in this verse, Maitreya Rishi says that when does the Anartha Nivritti become complete? Just like sometimes when a person has a cancerous cells in the body, then a person goes for radiotherapy. One has to go, say, 3 times, 4 times, multiple times. So depending on the extent of the cancerous cells, it takes multiple sittings to completely remove the cancerous cells. So one will want to know like how many sittings it will take for removing all the cells completely. So similarly here, like when will the Anartha Nivritti become complete? Because as long as some Anartha, some cancerous cells are remaining, then they will keep expanding, they will keep producing, they will keep spreading to other parts of the body. So in this verse, Maitreya says that when the senses become fixed on the attractive Lord, Drashtratmani Pare Harau, who is beyond the material influence, and who glances upon his devotee with mercy, then the sufferings disappear completely, like the complete disappearance of suffering in a deep sleep. So when the senses become completely fixed on the attractive Lord, then the sufferings disappear completely, the Anartha Nivritti becomes complete. So this verse can be interpreted from the point of Jnana Marga or from the point of Bhakti Marga. Both interpretations are given by Krishna Chakotipad. So from the Bhakti Marga point of view, this verse is interpreted as when the senses become fixed in the Lord, who is attractive with beauty and other qualities, when the eye, ear, nose, skin, and mind become completely absorbed in the beauty, voice, fragrance, etc. of the Supreme Lord, and one no longer desire to experience the material form, then the suffering is destroyed. Essentially, the simple understanding when the suffering becomes completely destroyed, or when the anartha nivritti becomes complete, is that when all our senses become fixed in the form of the Supreme Lord. And when our senses do not get diverted to some other material forms, material objects, then the suffering becomes complete. The suffering is completely destroyed. That is the answer. So Prabhupada in the purport, he actually highlights the importance of developing a higher taste. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinaha rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishva nivartate. That one cannot stop being active. One cannot be inactive even for a moment. All we have to do is like we have to give a superior engagement of the for the senses. Superior engagement for the senses. Sometimes, like today morning, I was hearing a Sanskrit class. A Sanskrit teacher said that like sometimes when we are doing bhajan, chanting, etc., still our mind is wandering. And we cannot do chanting throughout the day. We do not have the capacity to engage in only bhakti activities throughout the day. We have to find some engagement which are in the dharmic, within the dharmic realm, and which we can utilize in the service of the Lord. And just like, for example, suppose when there is a practice for shooting, suppose a person is practicing for gun shooting, or a person is practicing for shooting arrows. So there is the main target is there, and then around the target some circle will be there. So at least it is not expected that every time you will shoot only in the target. But at least we can aim, okay, let me at least shoot within that particular circle, within the, say, circle of a few centimeters diameter from that particular target. Instead of actually, the target is there in front of you, but you shoot somebody in the back, that is like completely opposite. But at least instead of shooting exactly in the target, at least you try to shoot somewhere near the target. So similarly, sometimes it may not be possible to fix all the time, all the senses indirectly in the bhakti activities. So at least, so the Sanskrit teacher was saying that one can actually, that is why learning Sanskrit Vyakarana, Panini Vyakarana, it's so helpful. So she said, sometimes in bhajan, our mind may wander, but Panini Sutras, Sanskrit Vyakarana Sutras, there are so many rules and this one, it helps a person to become focused. And of course, ultimately we have to engage that in the service of Krishna. So one has to find, the ultimate aim is that we engage all our senses 24 hours time only in the direct devotional service. That's what Rupa Goswami says. The essence of all instruction is to engage 24 hours all our senses in the service of the essence of all instruction. But at this point, if we are unable to do it, at least try to shoot the arrow within the circle. That means find some engagement within the dharmic realm where you don't find the time passing and which you can engage in the service of the Lord and the society. So that is another way. But so hey, Prabhupada talked about the importance of giving a superior engagement. So just like a child is very restless, the child is moving here and there. But how do you control the child? You give a superior engagement to the child. which will stop its restless nature, and also it will elevate the child. So generally, nowadays, okay, you stop the restless nature of the child, you just give some phone to her, and then the child becomes quiet. But actually, it may not elevate the child actually. So we have to give a superior engagement which will stop the restless nature of the child and which will also elevate the child, which will bring some focus. So similarly, that our mind is restless, so we have to give superior engagement. The ultimate superior engagement is devotional service. But if we cannot engage 24 hours in the 9 process of bhakti, we have to find out that some engagement within the realm of Sanatana Dharma, which we can engage in the service of the Lord, which is according to our nature. So, our activities must be so transcendently saturated that the Lord will be kind enough to look upon us favorably and engage us in His transcendental service. So, this is the next verse, last verse in the series. Ashesha Sanklesha Shamam Vidatte Gunanuvada Shravanam Murare Kimva Punastat Charanaravinda Paraga Seva Ratiratma Labda. So here Maitreya is saying that bhakti is better than jnana for destroying ignorance. Bhakti is better than jnana for destroying ignorance. So, ashesha shanklesha shamam vidatte. Simply by chanting and hearing of the transcendental name, form, etc. of the personality of Godhead, one can achieve the cessation of unlimited miserable conditions. Therefore, what to speak of those who have attained the attraction for serving the flavor of the dust of the Lord's lotus feet? So, hearing Gunanuvada Shravanam Murare, hearing and speaking about the qualities of the Lord in sadhana bhakti produces Ashesha Shanklesha Shamam Vidatte, destruction of unlimited suffering. Destruction of unlimited suffering. And Kimva Punasta Charana Ravinda, that is like a Kaimutika Nyaya. So, how much more can be attained by serving the pollen of the lotus feet of the Lord, appearing by its self-revealing nature during the state of Bhava Bhakti. So, Paraga Seva Ratiratma Labda, Paraga Seva Ratiratma Labda, that refers to the state of Bhava Bhakti. So, Sadhana Bhakti destroys ignorance and Bhava Bhakti brings the Lord under control. So, we can say the first 2 lines describe the sadhana bhakti. Sadhana bhakti destroys the ignorance. And the last line describes the bhava bhakti. Paraga seva rati. The word rati refers to the bhava bhakti. Paraga seva ratiratma labda. That means Lord comes under the control of, when a person comes to the stage of bhava. That is one of the characteristics of bhava bhakti is sudurlabha. Sudurlabha means it is very rare. Why it is very rare? Because the Lord comes under the control of the devotee. So here, let's say Prabhupada in the purport he talks about, he says there are 2 methods for controlling the material senses. One is the path of Jnana Marga, another is the path of Bhakti Marga. But of the 2 methods, the path of Bhakti is recommended because on this path, one does not have to wait for the attainment of the fruitive results of pious activities or for the results of knowledge. So, bhakti itself produces knowledge and detachment. And then he says, this bhakti is performed in 2 stages. One is sadhana bhakti, another is raga bhakti. Or we can say Vaidhi sadhana bhakti and raganuga sadhana bhakti. So, Vaidhi sadhana bhakti means what? Following the general rules and regulations of bhakti, where the inspiration comes. So, Vaidhi sadhana bhakti is like the mother has to tell the child is absorbed in playing. The mother has to tell the child, oh, this is time for studying, or this is time for eating. Mother drags the child and comes, oh, you have to actually study now. And child is not inclined to study, the child is not inclined to study naturally, but because of being told by the mother or the father, the child starts studying. That is like Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. The inspiration is coming from the Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. The studies, when the child on its own takes up the book and starts studying, and that is like the Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. And Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti is even something more. Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti is Bhakti practiced by following in the footsteps of the Ragatmika Bhaktas, that is the eternal devotees of Krishna in the Vrindavan. It is like, suppose somebody is a sports person, somebody is into sports. So anybody who wants to excel in sports, they have to have some general habits. Every day do some exercise, every day go for some jogging, every day do some sit-ups, every day do some asana, and have a particular, say, diet pattern, have a particular actually sleep pattern. These are actually general instructions there are some general instructions for any sports person, whether a badminton player, or a tennis player, or a running race player, or a cricket player, anybody. And then suppose when a person develops the interest in particular sports, suppose a person develops interest in, so I want to be a cricketer. And then, after developing interest in cricket, then his interest becomes even more focused. So I want to be a left-handed batsman. And then when his interest becomes more focused, then he takes up a particular role model. Among the best left-handed batsmen in the past or the present who are excelling, he takes up a particular role model and he studies that particular batsman. How did he actually develop that level of excellence? What is his lifestyle? What were the ups and downs he went through in his career to come to this level? So then he chooses that particular role model and starts emulating that particular person's habits, follows in his footsteps. So similarly, in Bhakti Marga, in Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, one has general rules. Okay, this many rounds chanting, hear Bhagavatam, worship the deities, etc. These are the general rules for any sports person. Similarly, Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, there are general rules. But then when a person becomes more advanced, then when a person comes to a stage of Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, then he chooses a particular role model. So I want to follow in the footsteps of Subal in Vrindavan, or Sridama, or I want to follow in the footsteps of Tungavidya Gopi. One takes up a particular role model and keeps hearing Krishna's pastimes in relation to that particular devotee and tries to understand the mood of that devotee, how that devotee serves Krishna, and tries to assist that devotee in her service in one's mind. That is the Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. We can see the similar, this one, just like in a sports example I gave, or suppose somebody is into studies, academics, there are some certain general habits to excel in academics. But then when you suppose somebody wants to particularly excel in, say, CA, then he chooses a CA topper, and so what were his particular habits, what were, in which coaching class he joined, how many hours he studied this subject, how did he divide the different subjects, how did he revise, then you particularly try to follow his habits. That is like a Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. So here, the great sage Maitreya now gives the final answer to all the questions of Vidura, that devotional service of the Lord is the ultimate means to mitigate all the miserable conditions of material existence. So by practicing sadhana bhakti, one may gradually rise to the point of raga bhakti, and by performing raga bhakti in loving transcendental service, one can even control the supreme powerful Lord. So I'll just take a break now. I'll just see some of the questions and then we'll continue the other verses. Antardvip Prabhu, what makes the soul identify with the changes in the subtle and gross body? Also, soul alone is a life force. So the final perceiver of misery is soul only, even if it is a dream life. So is it not a change in its position of bliss?
Ruji, can I a little bit elaborate on what I am asking?
Yes, Rav. Yes.
Like the first question, what makes the soul identify with the changes in subtle and gross body? So the example given by Maitreya Rishi is that the moon is not quivering, but the reflection of the is quivering, and that is making us perceive that the moon may be quivering. So, like say something is separate from my existence and it is changing. It doesn't matter to me if it is changing, but I am identifying with that change. That is a change in me. Yes. If something else, like so many things are did in this matter world, I don't identify with it, then there is no problem about it. But because I identify with the body and whatever connects to the body, so that means I am identifying, and this misidentification is a change in my way of working in my life. So that is a change.
The answer, what I see is that essentially the Maya potency, the living entity comes under the influence of Maya potency, therefore the soul actually identifies with the changes in subtle and gross body. And why the soul comes under the influence of Maya potency? It is without cause. Of course, we say the soul is because the soul has a desire to enjoy independently from the Lord, therefore the soul then comes under the influence of Maya. Then he starts identifying with the different gross and subtle body and then gets affected with the situation around him. So I feel the answer is because of the Maya potency.
And Ruji,
because like if you in the 7th canto, when in that episode, 7th canto, 1st chapter, when Narada Muni explains after when Shishupal was killed and Shishupal's body enters into the Krishna, then Yudhishthira Maharaj asks about how did Shishupal actually attain this. He was such a blasphemous person, but he attained this state of liberation. Then Narada Muni explains in that regard. He says, he explains the position of the Lord. He says the Lord actually does not have a material body. And then secondly, he says that he does not identify with matter. So therefore, somebody praises or criticizes, honor or dishonor, he is not affected only. This Shishupal, like he completely blasphemed Krishna right from the birth. Because the Lord is situated in a transcendental platform, he does not identify with it. So we can say that is like difference between the Lord and the living entity is living entity first of all has a material body and moreover he identifies with the material body. So the essential answer is because the living entity, he has a tendency to be overpowered by Maya, so therefore he identifies with matter.
The second question is, the soul is only the perceiver. So when you say dream-like, okay, then it is dream-like, but even in dream we perceive misery. So, like it is said that it is not, it should not be undergoing misery, but actually there is no other perceiver, even if the minds are there, but the perceiver is the soul and thus he is only miserable. And if he is not miserable, then why are we talking about compassion on the soul and all? Because he is blissful and everything else is temporary. So why do we have to worry about everything else which is temporary and illusory? So we are actually concerned about the soul's bliss only. And soul is not blissful. Otherwise, if we are not perceiving him blissful, but he is actually blissful, then we don't have to preach. He is blissful and everything else is dead.
So, see, there is a, from absolute point of view and like from a transcendental point of view, soul is never affected by matter. That is from a transcendental perspective, but actually on a practical level, the soul is affected by the matter because the soul is identifying with the false ego, and therefore he does go through miseries. Even I think there's one purport in personified Vedas prayers. Also, it is one prayer the personified Vedas are saying that how the soul is actually always in a transcendental position. So they are speaking that from a transcendental point of view. Like for example, like once some devotee asked Prabhupada that, oh, how many pure devotees are there in ISKCON? Or how many people are liberated? And Prabhupada said, okay, how many devotees are there currently in ISKCON? And somebody gave some number, 500,000 something. So Prabhupada said, oh, this many pure devotees are there. So, so this is but actually speaking, but when we see ourselves, we are not pure devotees. We have our own struggles and anarthas. Prabhupada said, oh, these many people are pure devotees. Sometimes from a transcendental perspective, okay, all these people are pure devotees because they have begun the path of pure devotional service. They have at least pure devotional service as the goal to some extent. But on a practical level, yeah, we may have different anarthas. We may have some mixture with some other motivations. So similarly, sometimes certain statements are made from a transcendental perspective to show that actually that state is something which you already achieved. You are something very close, to give the feeling to the struggling jiva that actually you are in a state, you are already a pure devotee, to give that sometimes encouragement, to give that confidence to the person. But yeah, practically speaking, but because we identify with the false ego, we do go through the different situations and miseries. That's how I'm thinking. I don't know whether it answered your question. Haribo?
Prabhuji, it answered, and I think this topic.
I will send you that reference. Like sometimes certain statements are made from a transcendental point of view. Listen, soul is. Their statements are also true, but in a conditioned state, because of our identification with the matter, we do go through these things. Just like in a dream. Dream actually, a person is going through miseries. But actually, the fact is, in the dream, sometimes we feel really terrified and we are running frantically, or we are crying or something. Like from the dream state point of view, one is actually going through the miseries. But for a person who is actually who is watching that person sleeping, and he sees that, oh, this person is having a sound sleep, he is completely peaceful and calm. So similarly, the statements are made, oh, the soul is completely pure, he is actually not affected by anything. So that's a statement from the point of view of the person who is actually watching the person who is dreaming. But the person who is dreaming, who is sleeping, he is actually going through miseries in the dream. From his point of view in the dream. But from the point of view that person who is sleeping, he is saying he just is peacefully there, and maybe that's what I'm getting. You see the other questions. What is the cause of soul's independent desire to enjoy? That is actually free will only. Cause of the soul's independent, that is the freedom which is given to the soul. That's why there is no cause. We can't. The association of the soul with the soul coming under the influence of material energy, that is without any cause, without any purpose. The soul comes under the influence of Maya without any cause or purpose. Sounds very vague. Yeah, that is something because everything in this world we are used to some cause and effect. We are used to the concept of cause and effect. One of the reasons is also the Western education system or the scientific bent of thinking that actually conditions a person to think in terms of cause and effect. But there are some things in this world which are without any cause. When Gajendra Namo Namak Karana Namo Namaste Namo Namaste Akila Namo Namaste Kilakaranaya Nishkaranaya Bhutakaranaya. He says that I offer my obeisances to you. You are the cause of everything, but you have no cause. You are the cause of everything, but you are not caused by something. And therefore, you are the wonderful cause of everything. You are the wonderful cause of everything because you don't have any cause. Therefore, some things in this world, many times people ask, if God is the source of everyone, then who is the source of God? So they can't actually understand the conception how the God is without any source. He is the God means only the source of everything, but who does not have a source? He is without any source. He is without any cause. But this is a axiom which we have to accept. That is what the Shastras say. So that is why when we depend only on Anumana, because Anumana Pramana, why it appears vague that soul comes under the influence of Maya but without any cause or purpose, because we are seeing only from Anumana Pramana point of view. So through Anumana Pramana, we can understand some things, but we can't understand, there are different things which are beyond the Anumana Pramana, which we can't understand through Anumana. Every Pramana has its own limitations. So this subject matter, how the soul comes under the influence of Maya, what is the cause of that, that cannot be understood by Anumana Pramana. It appears vague because we are using only the Anumana. So we have to take the help of the Shabda Pramana, which says that, oh, it is without any cause. Shyamlila Prabhu. The origin of the soul has been a controversial topic. Mostly we know that we have to focus on going back to the spiritual world than worrying about how we have fallen. But just for the sake of proper understanding, Gaudiya and people still maintain the understanding from Jaiva Dharma that Tatastha Shakti does not come from the spiritual world. What is it takes? Where did the soul come from? Secondly, are the souls falling all the time? Yeah, does Jiva fall? From Shastric point of view, there is no Shastric statement which says that Jiva falls from the spiritual world actually. And if we ask some of the learned, and even they would say, I have interacted with them, they would say that the idea that the Jiva fell from the spiritual world, or that there is no Shastric statement. And this is also accepted by other Vaishnava Sampradayas also. Because if you see Krishna's statement in the Gita, Yad Gatva na Nivartante Taddama Paramam Mama. Once a person goes to the spiritual world, one never comes back. This is a very clear, unambiguous statement that nobody falls from the spiritual world. So if we have to say that the living entity has fallen from the spiritual world, then you have to give a corresponding Shastric statement which says that all the jivas fell from the spiritual world. Because it's not only one verse in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna is saying, there are many, many verses which talk about the spiritual world. One of the essential difference between the higher heavenly planets in the spiritual world is that higher heavenly planets, once a person gets exhausted of his pious activities, he comes down. Shine punyam matyalokam vishanti. But the spiritual world, one never comes down, one never falls down. Yeah, one may, devotees may come down for the sake of assisting in the mission of the Lord, but they never fall down. Because that is the fundamental nature of the spiritual world. And there are many verses in the Bhagavatam, the Jiva Goswami in the Bhagavad Sandarbha, when he talks about, I think, 7 or 9 characteristics of the spiritual world, he says one of the characteristics is that spiritual world is a place from which nobody falls. So, but whether you accept, okay, then some people think that, okay, Jiva falls in the spiritual world, we have heard this idea. And then what is the guarantee that if you go back to the spiritual world, you will not fall down again? And then some other explanation they give, because you experience the suffering, so therefore you will not desire to come back here, like that. Different answers they give. But that is the essential idea that one falls from the spiritual world, that does not have a Shastric basis. In Prabhupada's answer, Prabhupada gave 3 different answers. Jiva fell from the spiritual world sometimes in his conversation. Sometimes he says that, even in the Bhagavatam purport, 3rd canto, I think 15, 16 chapter, he says that this is a proof that nobody can fall from the spiritual world, he says. So then why Prabhupada sometimes told that, Jiva can fall from the spiritual world? Because one of the reasons is that the Western bent of mind, it will grasp the idea that it is difficult to grasp the idea of Nitya Baddha concept. We are in the material world since time immemorial. Then one will get the question like, why some living entities are there in the spiritual world since time immemorial and others are there in the spiritual world. Some are in the material world, some are in the spiritual world. So these are something little difficult to concept because we are conditioned by that cause and effect, that idea. So sometimes Prabhupada, in order to create that urgency, so you just fell from the spiritual world, just practice bhakti and go back to the spiritual world. The goal remains the same, going back to the spiritual world. The process remains same, bhakti. The goal remains the developing love for Krishna, and the process remains same. Whether you think that we fell from the spiritual world, or whether you think that we are in the material world since time immemorial, the process remains same, the goal remains same. But the fact is that there is, at least I have not found any Shastric statement which says that Jiva fell from the spiritual world. And even when I interacted with some of the leaders in ISKCON, at least in their either they avoided this question, or in their private they agreed that actually Jiva did not fall from the spiritual world. They're Nitya Baddha. That's what I understand. So Jaya Vijay coming down as demons, is it not similar to the fall from Vaikuntha? So that is one of the unique, this one. It's in one sense, the desire of the Lord wanted to enjoy Virya Rasa. In the Jaya Vijay story, is there any statement which says that, just like Jaya Vijay fell from the spiritual world, so all the living entities fell from the spiritual world? We are talking about all living entities falling from the spiritual world. Bhagavatam gives the example of Jaya and Vijay. By that example, is there any Bhagavatam statement is there that just like Jaya Vijay fell from the spiritual world, all the living entities fell from the spiritual world. I don't think any statement is like that. We have our magazine named as Going Back to Godhead. How is it possible to go back unless one is from that place? Yeah, every living entity belongs to that place because the living entity by his nature is eternal servant of Krishna. So in that sense, every living entity's eternal position is to be engaged in the service of the Lord. So in that sense, we are supposed to go to that place. But just the point is, Krishna has mentioned the nature of the spiritual world so never comes from the spiritual world. You are not seeing the spiritual world, I have not seen the spiritual world. And so therefore, we have to, in order to understand spiritual world, the only way to understand is by depending on the Shastra. And there are Shastric statements which say that nobody falls from the spiritual world. So you have to produce a statement from the Shastra. You have to produce a statement from the Shastra which says that, okay, the Jiva fell from the spiritual world. If you produce a statement, then I am ready to accept.
Hare Krishna.
If you read the 11th canto purport, 11th canto Uddhav Gita purports, there also it is explained that the conditioned life is beginningless, but it is without end. The conditioned life is beginningless, but it is not endless. That means conditioned life is beginningless. That means what? We are Nitya Baddha. Since time immemorial we are there. But it is not endless because once a person takes this Bhakti Marga, then it comes to an end. And liberated life has a beginning, but it is endless. When a person takes to Bhakti, the liberated life begins. And once a person achieves his perfection, goes to the spiritual world, then it is endless. One never falls from there. And this is the Bhagavatam purport in the 11th canto based on the Bhagavatam verse. So, Narasimha Avatar Prabhu, the principle from NOD, if we become miserly, it contaminates our bhakti, one of the 64 items. One should not be neglectful in ordinary dealings. Yavahare api akarpanyam. Yeah, I think the same thing. Yeah. He gave the explanation of Bhaktivinoda Thakur from Chaitanya Shikshamrita. If Jiva never falls down, then how did we come? Let us say that we are Nitya Baddha. There are Nitya Baddha, Nitya Mukta, and then Sadhana Siddha. So Nitya Muktas or Nitya Siddhas are the eternally perfect devotees, the eternal associates of Krishna from the spiritual world. Nitya Baddhas are those who are there in the material world since time immemorial. And Sadhana Siddhas are when these Nitya Baddhas take to the Sadhana Bhakti, when they become perfect, when they go to the spiritual world, they become Sadhana Siddha, never to fall down again. Does Vidura's question stem from compassion for the jivas who are suffering? Many times I find that as a devotee, statements like this becomes my immediate intellectual response. This intellectualization represses compassion. How do we respond to the suffering of this world with philosophical insight and reality at our level? Yeah, essentially, when you are dealing with, say, others' questions or others' problems, there has to be a combination of head and heart. That means there has to be a combination of head means one should empathize with their feelings. One should empathize with their feelings, give them encouragement, At the same time, we should also give knowledge. So sometimes when we only give intellectual answer without empathizing with the feelings of the people, then it may not touch their heart, although one might have spoken the perfect knowledge, perfect Shastra. And sometimes there are people who are expert at empathizing with people, but they don't give the transcendental knowledge. Then it becomes simply like as long as you are empathizing, that person feels good. As long as somebody is blowing on the boil, you feel nice. Once the blowing stops, then the boil starts burning. So empathizing will be helpful, but then you can't be there empathizing. You can't be empathizing all the time. So therefore, you have to give transcendental knowledge, which will help that person to advance, even when you are not there. So therefore, there has to be a element of buddhi and bhava, buddha bhava samanvita. So the rishi, the definition of rishi which Prabhupada gives is that the rishis are concerned with the welfare of the people, and they know how to do welfare to the people. And thirdly, they actually take a personal risk in order to do welfare to the people. So one has to develop concern, and we should try to elevate the suffering by giving knowledge. And then thirdly, one should actually put practical effort to take some inconvenience to help others. What is the meaning of Ichchadvesha Samuttena? That doesn't say that we fell from the spiritual world. Ichchadvesha Samuttena Dvandva Mohena Bharata Sarva Bhutani Sammoham Sarge Yanti Parantapa. That is the verse. Because of Ichcha and Dvesha, we are actually in the material world. Because of Ichcha and Dvesha, the living entities are continuing their material existence. But that doesn't clearly say that, the jiva fell from the spiritual world. Because the Krishna statement in the Gita is quite unambiguous. Yad gatva nan nivartanti taddama paramamma. So you have to give a statement, okay, we fell from the spiritual world. That's what. But anyway, this is, I think, I'll take up maybe the remaining question. Just I will discuss some more verses, and then I will go through Toshan Nimai Prabhu. I'll go through that later. So, because we have to continue, one more chapter we have to finish. Vidura uvacha Sanchina samshayo mayyam tava suktasi na vibho ubayatrapi bhagavan manome sampradavati. So all of my doubts have been cut by the sword of your skillful speech. My mind completely understands both the independent Lord and the dependent Jiva. So Vidura is saying that my mind is now perfectly entering into the subject matters. So even a personality like Vidura has to consult persons like the sage Maitreya. So real knowledge of this relationship entails reviving his lost consciousness to this standard, and the process for such revival is devotional service to the Lord. Sadvetat vyakritam vidvan natmamayayanam hare abhatyapartam nirmulam vishwamulam nayadbahihi. O learned Maitreya, you have accurately explained how the external energy, whose actions are without purpose and without a cause, is under the shelter of the Supreme Lord. And you have explained how the Jiva's bondage, which is without a purpose and without a cause, is under the shelter of Lord's Maya. Except for that Maya, there is no cause for the universe. Except for that Maya, there is no cause for the universe. So here we see again think the Mataji had asked that how do we understand that the living entity's bondage is without any cause? Again, it is emphasized here that the actions of the Maya are without purpose and without a cause, and the living entity's bondage is without a purpose and without a cause. In fact, in the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra, the first 4 Vedanta Sutras are called as Chatushuri. The first 4 sutras are important, that Atato Brahma Jigyasa, Janmadhyasya Yataha, Shastra Yonitvat, and Tattu Samanvayat. So there are 4 main doubts which are raised, and 4 main doubts are answered in that. One of the doubts is that we can understand the absolute truth, the Supreme Brahman, by Anumana Pramana. What is the need to actually read the Shastra? Like that, this one doubt comes. Even in the Gita course, we use some of the arguments. Creation implies a creator, design implies a designer. So we can understand, that the Supreme Lord exists just by creation implies a creator, design implies a designer. So what is the need of Shastra? So that question comes, but actually it will go into different direction. But the Vyasadeva actually explains that when you say, for example, creation implies a creator, this is a valid argument, but it does not say that there is one creator who created everything in this world. Creation implies a creator, but how can we say that there is one creator, one Supreme Brahman who created everything? This conclusion you cannot arrive through the Anumana Pramana. You can come to this conclusion only through the Shastra. And there can be many creators. And also, creation implies a creator. But, this pen is created by some Devata, and that is created by Brahma. In this way, there may be hierarchy of creators. There are many creators who created different things. There are many hierarchy of creators. Different things are created by maybe different powerful living entities. How can we say that the person who created this world, the source of this world, that he has to be the Supreme Brahman? It could be a different living entity, maybe a more powerful living entity. Why it has to be the Supreme Brahman? Therefore, creation implies a creator, design implies a designer. Although these arguments we use, but these arguments cannot prove that there is one Supreme Brahman who created this world. Therefore, we have to depend on the Shastra to understand the Supreme Brahman. So, similarly, the Anumana Pramana, we can't actually we can't understand, why the Jiva is actually came into bondage. Except for that Maya, there is no cause for the universe. So Vidura is basically explaining what he has understood from Maitreya. When the student actually explains, this is what I have understood, that gives actually confidence to the teacher. The student has understood. Even in the Gurukul, actually the teaches the students, and then that student teaches the next batch of students, and then they teach the next batch. And also among the students, they sit with each other, and then they actually share with each other what they have understood. That's why there's a very famous verse which says that Acharyat Padam Adatte, that from listening from the Acharya or the teacher, one learns only 1/4. And remaining 1/4 is learned by discussing among the fellow students. And then 1/4 is learned by doing manana on what we have learned. 1/4 is learned from the teacher, 1/4 is by discussing with the students, and 1/4 is by doing contemplation on what we have heard. And 1/4 is assimilated in due course of time. You have to wait for. So in that sense, so what did I mention this? I forgot why I came to this one. So except for that, so Vidura is actually revealing that what he has understood from Maitreya Rishi. So going to the next verse. Yascha mudatamo loke yascha buddhe param gatah tavu bau sukamedete klishyatyantharito janah. He who is the most foolish in this world and he who has attained the Lord beyond matter increases happiness, whereas others just suffer. So Vidura says that both the lowest of the fools and who is transcendental to all intelligence enjoy happiness, whereas persons between them suffer the material pangs. So there are people who are completely foolish, they are on the animalistic platform. Although they may be suffering the miseries of life, but they may be unaware of the material distress. Just like a hog is eating the stool, but the hog is actually does not perceive the misery of that eating stool. So similarly, there are human beings in the mode of ignorance, but they supposedly enjoy the so-called happiness, which are actually miseries. And then there are the liberated souls who are really happy and who are transcended. Yascha buddhe param gatah, who have attained the Lord beyond the matter. And then there are in-between people, and these in-between people, they have the doubts. Just like before the exam, one who has not studied anything of the subject, and those who have done multiple revisions, both are completely happy. Both may be doing partying before the exam. But those who have just studied a few chapters here and some chapters there, and they are actually running for some Xerox, and they are trying to drink some tea to keep awake, to remain awake, and they are in tension actually. So Vidura says that the in-between people, they have the doubts. So Vidura, in one sense, he says that I was like an in-between person. I was having doubts, but my doubts are now removed by you. My doubts are removed by you. So therefore, Vedanta Sutra says that one should inquire about the Brahman. This inquiry is necessary for those who are in between the Paramahamsas and the fools who have forgotten the question of self-realization. Arthabhavam vinishchitya pratitasyapi natmanah tam chapi yushma charana sevayaham paranude. Convinced that the jiva does not actually suffer loss of knowledge, but not yet realizing it directly, I will destroy this lack of this realization by service to your lotus feet. So here Vidura is saying that I am obliged to you because I can understand that this material world is without a substance, and although it appears real, but I will realize this knowledge by serving your lotus feet. Right now I have the theoretical knowledge, but still I have not realized it directly. So how will I overcome this lack of realization? I will overcome this by sevayaham paranude, by service to your lotus feet. So similarly, one may get theoretical knowledge by reading from the Shastra. One may get some practical wisdom also. But ultimately the realization will come when we apply that knowledge and wisdom. One of the important factors is application is by serving the devotees. So I will destroy my lack of perception by service to your lotus feet. So by serving the feet of the great transcendentalists and by constantly associating with them, one is enabled to give up the false idea that the soul suffers from material pangs. Even one purport in the 6th Canto, Prabhupada explains that when a person goes through certain reversals, miseries in one's life, like we may theoretically understand, okay, I have to think it is my own karma, it is coming. We might have heard many classes, but our emotions are like, at one moment we may be thinking, ultimately it is my karma, I am going through the suffering. But the next moment, our emotion, without even realizing, some feelings of revenge towards some persons who inflicted that suffering, invariably that feelings of revenge come, and then we go to revenge fantasy, and then after some minutes we realize, oh, what I was thinking. Again we start thinking, oh, it is my karma, I am going through this. And then few seconds later we realize, again our mind is going into the revenge. We going to the blame game, everything. So then Prabhupada explains in that purport, a devotee thinks that actually I deserve more suffering than this, but by Krishna's mercy I am getting a small token. And then Prabhupada says that this consciousness is possible for a person who has served a devotee who is absorbed in Krishna. Something to this effect. Yata Krishnarpita pranas tatpurusha nishevaya. Yata Krishnarpita pranas, like that the verse comes in 6th Canto, 1st chapter. That means this consciousness is possible for a person who has engaged in the service of the representative of the Supreme Lord. So, therefore, similarly, Vidura is saying that I will destroy the lack of realization by service to your lotus feet. Yat sevaya bhagavata kutastasya madudvishaha ratiraso bhavettivra padayor vyasanardanaha. And then he says the result of serving the devotee is that the intense rasa of bhava bhakti to the Lord appears. So by yat sevaya bhagavata, by service to the devotees, intense rasa of bhava bhakti to the Lord, rati raso bhavet tivra, intense rasa of bhava bhakti to the Lord, who is fixed in one form, kutastasya, and madudvisha. Madudvisha here means one who destroys the obstacles for the devotee, or one who is the enemy of the sufferings of his pure devotee. And padayor vyasanardanaha, and the destruction of the material suffering then takes place. So bhava bhakti is called as tivra or a sharp because by its sweetness it surpasses all other material or spiritual sweetness. Because one of the characteristics of bhava bhakti is moksha lagutakrit and sudurlabha. Moksha lagutakrit means one perceives even the liberation to be insignificant. So bhava bhakti is called tivra because it surpasses all other material or spiritual sweetness, including the liberation. It impels one to become unaware of all else. And that is nothing but the moksha lagutakrit. So the Lord is the enemy of the Madhu demon, or in other words, he is the enemy of the sufferings of his pure devotee. So a living entity in the liberated position of transcendental service to the Lord becomes attracted to one of the above mentioned mellows. And when one is engaged in transcendental loving service to the Lord, one's service attainment in the material world is automatically vanquished. So the result of serving is the intense rasa of bhava bhakti to the Lord appears. So the last verse, this I will end. Durapahyalpa tapasa seva vaikunta vartmasu yatropagiyate nityam devadevo janardanaha. So persons whose austerity is meager can hardly obtain the service of the pure devotees who are progressing on the path back to kingdom of God. Pure devotees engage 100% in glorifying the Supreme Lord, who is the Lord of the demigods and the controller of all the living entities. So here Vidura says that to get an opportunity to serve the devotees is very rare. Such an opportunity comes only by the mercy of the devotees and not by our austerity. So service to the devotees, what kind of devotees? Vaikunta Vatmasu, who are on the path to Vaikunta. And Yatra Upagiyate Nityam, who are constantly singing about the Supreme Lord. And service to such a devotee is Durapa, it is very rarely achieved. Alpa Tapasa, for those who perform little austerity. Rarely achieved for those who perform little austerity. So, Vishwanath Chakravarti says that though the verse says that those will attain, those will little austerity rarely attain devotees, this is only a conventional expression. Service to devotees is attained only by the mercy of the devotees. It is not attained as a result of austerity. So essentially, this verse talks about the rarity of getting an opportunity to serve the devotees. That is why when Ramananda Rai, when Mahaprabhu asked Ramananda Rai, what is the greatest suffering? Ramananda Rai said the greatest suffering is to be separated from the pure devotees of the Lord. So that is something one should not take it for granted. This system of association has been recommended since time immemorial, but in this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, it is especially recommended by Mahaprabhu. So Mahatmas are on the path to Vaikunta. They always chant and hear the glories of the Lord rather than talk of dry, profitless philosophy. Even if one has no assets of favorable austerity, if he nonetheless takes shelter of the Mahatmas who are engaged in chanting and hearing, is sure to make progress on the path back home, back to Godhead. So there are some, and then Vidura will ask actually a series of questions in this chapter. We will actually go through these questions tomorrow. So we have 2 more questions. So tomorrow we'll go fast, and then we have 1 more chapter to cover. So I'll take up the remaining questions. Others, those who want to leave, they can leave. Toshan Nimai Prabhu is mentioned. Tomara Milane Bai Abarase Sukapai Gocharane Guri. This is some, I think, the prayers of written by Prabhupada, that Yalduta prayers.
Yes, Prabhu.
So the pure devotees who have come from the spiritual world for performing the mission of the Lord, sometimes they reveal their inner moods actually. They come from the spiritual world there for preaching the message of the Lord. So Prabhupada is revealing that mood. So where does this verse say that all the living entities came from the spiritual world? That is for that only him asking a reference actually.
He is telling Prabhuji fall into cycle of Janma, like multiple birth and death. The Prabhupada is writing in this. And also Prabhuji,
that is the mood of actually. That is the mood of actually pure devotee. He considers him when Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying that Amito Kamera Dasa. Do we take it literally actually? There are eternal associates who come from the spiritual world, but they say, oh, I have been suffering here since time immemorial. So when they are in the mood of humility, when they are talking about that, from that do we conclude that all the jivas came from the spiritual world?
No.
It is not it doesn't seem to be the logical answer actually.
And also Prabhuji, of course, I don't know, like, of course, what you're telling.
First of all, one thing is you have to understand. One shouldn't be something like by this understanding. One shouldn't get something. Oh, we are how is it we are getting a different understanding in the thing, oh, we are cheated or something. No, you have to understand one thing clearly, that the goal remains same and the process remains the same. Going to the spiritual world, sadhana bhakti, that remains same. But even another logical thing is that there are verses in the Bhagavatam, many places in the Bhagavatam which says that Tvam bhakti yoga paribhavita krit saroja aste shutekshita pato nanunata pumsam. Brahmaji is praying that when the devotee worships in a particular mood, according to the mood of his worship, I appear accordingly, according to his mood. Ye yatamam prapatyante tam tadeva bhajamyakam. So therefore, if you have come from the spiritual world, that means that our relationship with the Lord is already fixed. And there is no choice about choosing some other mood of relationship. It is already fixed. But there are so many verses which say that depending on how the devotee wants to worship me, then I also reciprocate accordingly. That means the devotee can choose to get attracted to either Narsingadev or Vamanadev, or he can choose to be a follower of Subala or Raktaka, or he can choose to be a follower of Yashoda or Nanda Maharaj, Raganuga Bhakti, Vaidhi Bhakti. And the Lord reciprocates accordingly. So otherwise, if one has fallen from there, that means the relationship is fixed, then what is the need of these verses which talk about, which give the choices actually. And you can, of course, I am a small person, I am just telling my understanding. Whenever you get time or whenever you can write to, say, Banu Maharaj or Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj or Shivaram Maharaj, you can, whenever you get an opportunity, we can ask them. Because I don't want to create some many controversy or something like that. So Gaur Leela Prabhu, I think before that also, could you please give any understandable example of causeless other than the Lord? Could you please give any understandable example of causeless other than the Lord? Other than the Lord, which we see, one is the Lord is the cause of everything, but he does not have any cause. Mentioned that. Another is even the living entity is coming into bondage. It is without any cause. Generally, say we do some activity and then as a result of that we suffer some reaction. Law of action and reaction, law of karma. We are going through certain reaction, certain suffering or certain pleasure. The cause is we did something good or bad in the past. So the question comes about, so when the living entity is in bondage since time immemorial, so what was the initial karma, what was the initial cause? So that is causeless actually. It is there since time immemorial. That is why you can read very clearly in the Bhagavatam 11th Canto purport, the Navayogendra section. I can send the purport later. The conditioned life is beginningless. It's since time immemorial. But it is not endless. And liberated life has a beginning, but it is endless. So many souls are suffering in the material world and we say it is causeless. Isn't it heartless to say in this manner? Why Jiva can't exercise his free will of independent desire to enjoy in the spiritual world? After all, it is free will. So, no, it is not. So many souls are suffering in the material world. You can say it is causeless. You can't account for the beginning karma. Like somebody living entity is there since time immemorial in this material world. So how did he come in contact with the material energy? The Shastra is saying that, I read the verse clearly, that if you want, I can actually quote the Vishnu Chakravarti's commentary, the 17th verse. It is mentioned that the person who has achieved the Supreme Lord, who is, no, it's not the 17th verse, 16th verse. You accurately explained how the external energy, whose actions which are without purpose and without cause, is under the shelter of the Supreme Lord. And you explained how the Jiva's bondage, which is without purpose and without cause, is under the shelter of the Lord's Maya. Except for that Maya, there is no cause for the universe. Prabhupada has translated differently, but we can actually go through the 9 commentaries where Vishnu Chakravarti has given this explanation. So that's how it is explained. It is not a heartless to say, it is actually the fact. It is, the Siddhanta is told like that. Jiva can't exercise his free will of independent desire to enjoy in the spiritual world. The spiritual world is a place where everyone is serving Krishna. So there the nature of the spiritual world is everyone is actually serving the Lord. So there is no question of enjoying independent. The Jiva has a free will over there. The Jiva, in fact, in the spiritual world, there is a greater freedom, and there is also greater resources to enjoy. The 3rd canto, 15th chapter, we see that the spiritual world is filled with so many opulences, and the devotees are surrounded by beautiful women, and so many opulences, and such a nice atmosphere. There is a greater resources are also there, and also greater freedom is also there. Just like even in the material world, when a person advances, say in a corporate company or in an institution, one is given greater freedom. On a spiritual platform also, Krishna gives greater freedom. But despite that, so the combination of greater freedom plus greater resources, normally from a material point of view, we will think that, oh, that means that there is so much of such a great opportunity for fall down. Suppose complete freedom is there, and also you have all the resources also. Somebody has resources but no freedom, then he can't enjoy. Somebody has freedom, no resources, then he can't actually enjoy. But if both are there, and that is the nature of the spiritual world, but still nobody ever commits a mistake of trying to enjoy independently from Krishna. And you can imagine like what must be the absorption of the devotees in the spiritual world. It is not because sometimes we have innate notion, maybe once we go to the spiritual world, we will not fall down because we will be mechanically programmed to always serve Krishna. So therefore, we will never fall down. Being mechanically programmed means that there is no freedom, so we will be mechanically programmed to serve Krishna, therefore we will not fall down. No, it is not because we are mechanically programmed. Rather, in the spiritual world, a person has a complete freedom and all the resources, but still a person never makes a choice, never actually misuses the choice. So that shows actually the level of absorption of the residents of Vaikuntha. The 15th chapter talks about Krishnatmanam Yat Sankulam Haripada Natimatra Drishtair Vaidurya Marakata Hema Mayair Vimane Yesham Brihat Tatitata Smitashobi Mukhya Krishnatmanam Na Raja Adadur Utmayadhyai. Although the Vaikuntha Vasis were surrounded by beautiful women and the beautiful, the very precious Vaidurya gem, etc., because their minds were absorbed in Krishna, they are never stimulated by passion. So it is not because mechanically they were forced to serve Krishna. No, their minds are absorbed in Krishna, and also the nature of the spiritual world is that one will never fall down. That is the nature of the spiritual world. By good fortune you have remembered me, and by good fortune I have seen you again after so long. So, dear Brahmana, I am totally under your control. Please feel free to enjoy here as you like. So, this is from the
With this Brad Bhagavatam, when the Brahmana goes back to the spiritual world, Krishna says that after a long time I'm seeing you. A long, long time you have returned back here. And please feel to.
No, I don't know whether to make a general statement, actually all jivas came from the spiritual world. How this can be a strong pramana for that, I'm still not convinced actually. Like Krishna is saying, I've seen you after a long, long time.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Generally we hear that it is said Gaurang Mahaprabhu is Patit Pavan and we are Patit. So that means we are fallen. So where have we fallen from then?
Yeah, we are fallen. Yeah, we are. That's why the Nitya Baddha means we are eternally in that conditioned state. So that is why, in one point of view, Prabhupada also told that there is no need to focus so much about where we fell from. More than that, you find out how to actually go back to the spiritual world, how to go to the spiritual. You focus on that instead of where we fell from. We must be knowing that example, somebody is like drowning in the river and then another person is trying to help. And then he is asking, tell me who pushed me into the river. Will be the answer to this question. So in that sense, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, in one place he says that because of the illusory energy, sometimes people go into endless debates on where we fell from. When people go into endless debates or where we fell from, that kind of debate is also under the influence of illusory energy, like that he says. So we don't have to focus too much on where we fell from. Prabhupada also explains that. Kaka, I think there's a Nyaya he explains. But it's a fact that if you want, I can show you can see Bhanu Maharaj's translation of that Bhagavad Sandarbha. I can show you the Anucheda, the Bhagavad Sandarbha, in that some 7 characteristics of the spiritual world. One of the characteristics is the place from where nobody falls. And then there are multiple quotations given. Gita 15 chapter verse, etc. So this question need not be delved too much upon. It does not change one's practice. It does not change one's goal. That remains same. But there are certain. One other thing is that when you understand your Nitya Baddha, you has a choice as to how you want to serve Krishna in the spiritual world, which form, which devotee. So that choice is there. That gives room there. Okay, I think we are done with almost all the questions, I guess.
Hare Krishna.
Shall we end here?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhuji,
yes.
Can I just ask in this context only the same thing? Prabhupada many times says going back home, back to Godhead. So is it not a sufficient reason that we have come from the spiritual world only?
See, we use the phrase back to Godhead. We have to go back to Godhead.
Yes.
Spiritual world. But so you have to give a Shastrik Pramana. Na? When we say Yadgatva na nivartanti taddama paramam mama. If it is the Jiva fell from the spiritual world, you have to give a Shastrik Pramana. The Acharyas, there is one Nyaya called as Bada Amisha Nyaya. Bada Amisha Nyaya means Like in order to catch a big fish, you give some contamination, or you put some certain bait, which may be a little contaminating, but in order to catch a big fish. So sometimes acharyas, in order to catch the urgency in the people to take to bhakti and this one, sometimes they may say certain statements, but that is not something to be found fault with the acharyas. And as I mentioned, Prabhupada has given all three answers. Why do you focus on only? So when Prabhupada has given, there are many statements of Prabhupada where he says nobody falls from the spiritual world, and you are quoting back to Godhead. So first of all, and some places Prabhupada he came from the spiritual world, some purports also he says. So then when there are contradictory statements, then we have to, then focusing on only one statement, or how do we resolve the controversy, that is a greater, that's not simple this thing. We have to go into the Shastra, you have to go to what are the Shastra, because every statement which Prabhupada writes in the purport, generally it is something paraphrasing of some statement in the Shastra. Sometimes you may quote the verses, sometimes you may not quote the verses. So it's not something to be too much focused on. Okay, we didn't come from the spiritual world, or we. So okay, even if you accept, okay, you came from the spiritual world, you can accept that also, but the process remains same, goal remains same. But anyway, I gave you understanding.
This shloka, Prabhuji, Prabhupada very often quoted to refute even the Mayavad, Mukti Hitvartha Rupena Swarupena Vyavasthiti, that situated in one's own original pure consciousness. Means there is one Swarupa is there, pure consciousness, and the Mukti means actually to attain that Swarupa, pure love for Krishna. Because otherwise Mukti means, it seems that there is no personal form, there is no personal relationship with the Lord. So Prabhupada very extensively quoted this shloka, that Mukti means actually to situate in one's own eternal constitutional position as servant of the Lord.
Correct.
Yep. So Prabhuji, this is also one Shastric reference. Swarupa, it talks about Mukti means attaining one's own original form.
No, I didn't get how does this verse say that one fell from the spiritual world?
It talks about the constitutional position as a pure servant of the Lord.
What is the disagreement? There is no disagreement in that. Because the soul, Mamai Vamsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, it is an Amsha of Krishna. Therefore, constitutional position, eternal servitor of Krishna. It's true. Does it show that that's the constitutional position, whether it's the material world or the spiritual world, that is his constitutional position? This verse does not seem to say that one fell from the spiritual world.
Many places, anyways, like, actually as you're telling, because many places Prabhupada called it the reinstating oneself as servant of the Lord. One has forgotten one's identity as servant of the Lord. And because Nitya Baddha, then it gives identity that actually this is not Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem Sadhyak Bhuna Shravanadi Shuddha Chitta Karudai. That was not there in the beginning, but now we are realizing it. Because Nitya Baddha means it's not there in the beginning, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem. But this shloka says this Krishna Prem is always Nitya Siddha, always there, but we have to just revive that Krishna Prem.
Yeah, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabuna, I mean, a living entity eternally has the potential to develop love for Krishna. He has that inherent potential to develop love for Krishna, and then when he receives that seed of bhakti from the Guru, and then when he start watering that seed, then he actually helps him to develop love for Krishna. That's what it means.
Hare Krishna. Prabhuji, there is this shloka that Krishna bhuliya ji bhog vancha kare ataye matare jhapatiya dare. So Krishna bhuliya ji. So there is a time when one forgets Krishna, and then Maya is capturing him. So when he was remembering Krishna, so where was that jiva? He must be in the spiritual world, because he is remembering Krishna.
No, one can be. See, we are only thinking into the play. He can be remembering Krishna in the material world also. talk about liberated in the material world.
Someone who is always
I,
like someone who is already remembering Krishna, why will he be in material world? It is created for those who are rebellious souls.
no, there is see, we have to clearly understand that material world and material consciousness, spiritual world and spiritual consciousness. We think in terms of Vrindavan, the place Vrindavan and the consciousness of Vrindavan. So many times we think in terms of wanting to go to the place Vrindavan, but more than wanting to go to the place Vrindavan, we should focus on developing Vrindavan consciousness. So similarly, spiritual world is only the physical place spiritual world. Another is actually developing the spiritual consciousness of the spiritual world. If a person is developing the spiritual consciousness, then it does not matter whether he is in the material world or the spiritual world, he is in the spiritual world. So, forgetting Krishna means he is in the material world.
Prabhuji.
So, anyway, I think it's not we don't have to focus too much on this. But I don't want to refute.
One little question, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, if there is no facility to not love Krishna in the spiritual world, doesn't that mean that love is incomplete there because there's no freedom to not love Krishna in the spiritual world? If there's no opportunity to fall, that means he's forced to be there. Then in the spiritual world, if there is no freedom,
he has complete freedom. He has a complete freedom and he has complete resources. That is how the spiritual world is.
But Prabhuji, isn't that this freedom also?
But still, a devotee never makes a mistake.
Doesn't that mean it also has a facility to not love? That's why that gives, because we say freedom means
that freedom is there. Freedom is there.
But then he can't fall from there. Then Prabhuji, that he has to be always there. Then in that case, means he doesn't have full freedom. Then because he has no choice to come to other place than spiritual world. In that case,
no, he has
and
complete
love
freedom.
His free will is there.
No, he has complete freedom and he has all the resources. But my just point is that you just give me a direct verse from the Shastra. The spiritual world is something which nobody has seen. You have to depend only on the Shastra. Krishna is making a statement, Yad Gatva Na Nivartante Taddhamam Paramam, nobody returns from there. So if you are saying all jivas came from the spiritual world, you give me a 10 chapter verse as an unambiguous statement. If there is something, I'm ready to accept it. But anyway, this is a subject which is not to be, we don't have to worry too much on this. As I mentioned that even if you accept this, or you came from the spiritual world, it is all right. But the path remains same, goal remains same. Okay.
Yes, Prabhuji.
And
because the discussion came up, so we are just different angles we're discussing because this point came up. Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.
We can when you get opportunity, we can ask maybe other learned devotees, Maharajas, or through email or something. We can.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Danat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Haribo.
Prabhuji, in the Vedabase, GBC has released one document, our original position. There, GBC writes that we fail from.
Yeah, I've gone through that actually.
So what does it explain there in that? I did not just go through it. Aisham Prabhu sometimes mentioned this particular point.
Yeah, you can go through that, no problem. That's why this is a topic. Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj said that we are not going to debate all the time this thing. But essentially, Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, even when the Guru and Sadhu speak, they speak based on the Shastra. Therefore, Shastrik Pramana should be there for everything. Hare Krishna. So we'll, I think, end the class now. Kantaran Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you very much for your patient attention. Hare Krishna.